my process has changed over the years. You know, when you are in art school early, we all think we're painters and we don't know better. So I did go through a few phases of trying different mediums and formats, but nothing really spoke to me as the tool that I can like feel myself. So I think that when I finally landed on focusing on incorporating research, having a practice that is more like research oriented, and I understood that the gestures that I was making were a lot about working with appropriated images and what that means and how to mediate and transform forms that are, or images that are given to me. That's when I realized, oh, this is how I create. When I was younger and I was maybe trying to create from scratch, it just didn't feel right. And I think I finally understood that my skill and my strength was in identifying what captures my attention from a given world of already existing imagery and text and history itself, and just appropriate some of it and play around and transform it into my own language. So I am combining images that come from different time periods, and for each series is different, but there's a line, there's a constant interest to me in when it comes to like selecting what images to use and where my research goes. There's an inclination to look at history from the classical Greek times. The reason why is because, well, there are various reasons why, but one is I'm trying to question these ideas of beauty and the archetypes of beauty and what humans should look like, behave like, think about. And I think even though it was like thousands of years ago, we still go through that process of having to respond to something that is bigger than us, that is always telling us how to look like and what to be like. The form of collage is kind of by nature putting pieces together that already exist in the world and create something new. There's a reality that's given to you and you have to transform it. As queer and also as Latinx immigrant coming from a country that it has its own ideas of beauty, of aesthetics, and the roles that that plays politically in society. And coming here, I've been here a long time, but like always having to reinterpret and negotiate with what you've learned most of your life, with what is your reality on your present. If I'm working on a specific project, let's say a show or a deadline, the process is more planned. So I usually start by reading and doing research, and by research I mean from reading textbooks to watching movies, going on the internet in a rabbit hole of like a million Google pages open. And of course there's a line of decisions that I make in terms of what kind of things I'm reading, and it usually goes from history of Greco-Roman mythology and sculpture, and books on feminism and history of gender roles, or like cinema. And usually after an extensive period of reading and watching and doing research, I'm drawn to like one specific tale or mythology that kind of is the starting point for me. And then from there, I go into another rabbit hole of learning about that tale or learning about that specific myth. So I read scholars analyzing it and movies that are related to it. I spend a lot of time with that particular myth, and then I have to unlearn all of that and just sit down and make work that responds to the feeling of that. So all of that research, I try to narrow it down to one or two things that are triggering for two sentences, concepts that are short and easy for me to sit down and respond with the material and create from that. Because otherwise I'm very in with all these concepts and all this knowledge in my head, and I cannot produce, kind of stops me from. And then when I feel like I'm done, I have to go back to understanding what I did. So I go back to, again, a moment of like inviting people to my studio, like to talk about it and like all the possibilities, and to go back to the discourse and conceptually what is that I'm doing. The installation aspect of my show, I would say, is me attempting to add another layer to all the layers that already exist in my work, even though most of it is, you know, on paper, kind of small format, because I'm trying to be, usually my response to the material is to be loyal to the format that the source, the printed matter that I work with, but it's very layered, and it has a lot of meanings and layers to it. So I think that taking it into space, it's a way to create another layer of it, because it's not only taking it into space, but it's also blowing it up to almost human scale, so people can have a way to like relate to it. These are clearly images that belong to a context that is like either a book format or a magazine. But at the same time, these are usually images of things that we know that in real life are sculptural and are human scale or even bigger. When I moved here, I finished my undergrad studies and then I went to grad school in New York, and I think that's when it was more clear to me what my voice was as an artist when I arrived to New York. I think it was coming to New York as an immigrant, even though it's exciting and it's diverse and you don't really feel alone here because there's people from all over the place. But I saw myself as a Latin American, not for the first time, but it was very obvious to me all of a sudden that I was that. I remember going to Central Park and seeing these statues of the Latin American liberators, and I was like, it felt like out of context. And it made me question my own history, like the history of my country, of my people, of myself. I started to be more aware of how history was told to me, because I grew up in the 80s and 90s. It was told in a very Eurocentric way. I started reading more about decolonization. It was the beginning of Decolonize This Place and the beginning of this wave of activists throwing off statues that represented complicated histories. And it was all very exciting. It was right when I moved to New York, and then it makes sense for me. By deconstructing, I mean like unlearning also history, and because I'm an artist, just doing that through my practice.